It has been so long. Yeah. It says it's literally been a month since I've done this. So I feel like we're going to get the whole way through this conversation. And then I'm going to say, oh, sorry, Robert, it didn't record. But it was a good conversation anyway. Maybe it won't be. I don't know.
Our audience is waiting.
Yeah, they've been talking to me.
No.
I've actually had a few said, hey, are you guys going to record anymore? So we recorded last time right before I headed out on vacation. My intentions were to do something while I was in Maui, but that was a stupid plan. Because I was enjoying.
It was a stupid plan when you said it.
No, I was enjoying time with my wife way too much to think about doing a podcast while I was there.
I think Brandy thought it was a stupid plan.
I think she would have been irritated if I would have tried to make it work. But no, it was a wonderful, wonderful time with my wife.
I'm excited.
And
for you.
in the meantime, we were just talking in the meantime, you've got two kids hopefully graduating this weekend from Liberty, and I've got my third oldest is graduating from high school this weekend. So it's a big weekend.
She leaves.
And then she leaves the very next day.
Yeah.
We're taking her down the very next day for the summer. So it's kind of a big weekend.
Yeah.
And it's Mother's Day.
It's Mother's Day.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, it's Mother's Day. Okay. Got to give that some thought. Yeah. I'm putting the slideshow together it's funny because my kids joke about me. We had a little challenge for the adults at the young adult Bible study one time. And it was, I can't remember. They're trying to get us to guess what the prompt was, what the question was and they had some clues on a whiteboard and they thought it was hysterical. And basically the prompt was, who's more likely to cry, Mr. Mayberry or Mr. Bouch?
Oh.
Yeah, Mark or Toby?
Yeah,
because he's kind of he wears his heart on his sleeve like I do sometimes. That's always the joke. Like at graduations, oh man, I get very nostalgic at a especially because you do the slideshow. We do slideshows, like a 3-minute slideshow of our kids from birth to graduation, and so you're sitting there looking and remembering everything. So
yeah.
That's my plans for this weekend is to cry, but I was putting a slideshow together today, and it's been a little bit emotional. Yeah. How have you been for the last 4 weeks?
Good, busy, but good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're planning to head out next week.
That's right. You took my advice.
A little bit. I think so. We don't have anything planned yet, but
that's fine.
Well,
my most important advice was ask Nicole what she thinks you should do.
Yeah.
And did you do that?
We've talked about it. Yeah. No, it's definitely.
And she liked the idea of you guys getting away for an extra week.
Yeah.
Well, it's easy then. It's easy. Yeah, like I said, you won't look back a year, 5 years, 10 years from now and say, man, those 3 weeks in the pulpit that I missed in May of 2025.
I wish
But you will absolutely say, man, that extra week we spent together as a family in May of 2025. We still remember, the summer we did 4 years ago.
I'm sure.
And we will forever.
I think as your kids get older, particularly, you realize how fleeting the time is. It doesn't necessarily... You don't necessarily realize that in infancy or in the beginning. I mean, you do in some ways, but certainly when you start hitting some of these milestones, graduations,
for sure,
that sort of stuff, you think, my time is so limited. I've got to maximize the time.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel both with my two oldest is, I've got to maximize the time because it's so short.
Yeah.
And it also makes me, what that's done, and that's part of having a larger family, I think, is it's helped me with my younger ones to appreciate the time more at the age they are now.
They always get the best, don't they? They get the best of us. It's funny because it's almost a joke. I'm a youngest child, so I'm the beneficiary of it.
Me too.
So the youngest children always get the nostalgic, like, oh, let's not let this time.
Yeah.
Like, the first children, you're trying so hard to make them perfect.
Right.
For the first several years, like you're trying to discipline them perfectly and feed them perfectly and educate them perfectly and everything. And then pretty much poof, they're gone. And you're like, wow, maybe I should spend a little more time with the next one, kind of
Yeah.
enjoying. And then by the time you get to the 4th or 7th, I mean, Isaiah, good grief, that
Yeah.
kid's going to be, who knows what his life's going to look like.
And I think like it's funny because you think about him. I think about Isaiah at the age that he is, and it's like, you know, he's so easygoing, and he's just like, you know, he thinks of things like how to be helpful and how to be. And I think, well, he's got 2 parents plus 6 other parents,
Right,
that are like,
that's right.
you know,
Yeah, let us help you, Mom and Dad. We'll just teach him all the stuff that you.
yeah.
In the meantime, our oldest ones are. My oldest is thinking about traveling the world coming this Friday. This fall
Yeah.
is thinking about getting out and traveling around the world.
Yeah.
And which is cool. It's exciting, but I think, man, time is fleeting.
It is.
So let's use the time.
So-
We got a few minutes. I had a conversation. Okay. One of my nephews is really bullish about AI. Okay. And so we've had conversations in our own family. We've had conversations in the young adult Bible study about AI and the benefits and dangers and all the things that it could be useful for and all the things that we really need to keep in mind as we roll into this kind of new territory. And I don't want to be the old fogey and always be the one saying, "Oh no, things were better back when I was," I don't want to be that. And I do see some utilitarian kind of purposes for AI in particular. But the one thing that I said to him when I was talking to him the other day, because there's a lot of, even among the younger generation, people that are a little bit wary of it. I heard Elon Musk on a podcast one day talk, and he said, it's someone who knows about AI and where it's headed.
Yeah.
That's the guy. That guy has a pretty good handle on it. Even if his companies aren't going to be developing, the kind of the big 800-pound gorilla, which they probably end up will be. But anyway, even if it's not him, it'll be someone that he's very familiar with. And he said, 20% chance AI destroys the world. I was like, wait, a 1 in 5 chance? The guy who's a little socially awkward and a little strange, but pretty stinking smart.
Yeah.
And has his thumb on the pulse.
Yeah.
Says 20% chance it's gonna destroy the world.
And what I've read, X has like Grok, which is X's AI, is like probably one of the best out there right now.
I know they're very aggressive with developing it because they realize
so
it is the wave of the future.
I would think he would know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and he said that, I don't know if he said it kind of in jest. Or he seemed to be fairly serious about it. And I guess, there's things that I hear sometimes that I think only God can keep humanity from destroying ourselves from time to time. Like there are things that I've heard recently that I'm like, wait, okay, I'm glad. I'm glad we don't have to worry about these things that God's got under control.
Well, and the scripture says that if God had not shortened those days, even the very elect, would not have persevered through. And so you think there is something about coming that the Lord is going to have to kind of cut short the time, or else
it's like
we would terminate
we're
ourselves.
looking for ways to destroy ourselves.
Yeah.
And all that said, the conversation around AI, the one thing in particular that I said, it's not, I don't think it's how much AI in particular, for me, what I look at as a bigger concern, how much it changes the technology world or that sector, or how it changes how we do things externally, like how we write papers, or whatever. The algorithms that are built into it that help us automate all kinds of stuff, that are going to help us automate things. That's not as big a concern as what it does inside of us, as what it's going to do to us. And what I wanted to talk about today in particular was creativity. And when we talk about AI, I think that's the one thing that concerns me, is that it has the real potential to kill creativity.
Yeah.
You see it grading papers. To me, it's insanity. It's insanity that we have to use AI to try to find AI written papers. And I'm thinking, let's just not cheat, people. Let's not cheat your own education.
Yeah.
Write your stinking paper yourself.
Yeah.
Don't have somebody else write it for you or some other thing. And it's a huge problem in academia right now. And then they have AI bots that are, AI
Checkers.
that can check but then you can run it through and there's ways to around that. There's all kinds of loopholes.
Yeah. So I teach a couple classes online, and most the classes that I teach are mainly writing intensive because you're researching theology or something, so you get a lot of writing. And you can tell, I mean, for me, it's so easy to pick out when something's AI and when something's not. In the written word. Now that will probably change over time. I think AI will get better at writing in a more natural voice. But the checkers, I've run things through that I know are AI, and the checkers don't get it. Already.
Why would they? Tell me that. What compels an AI model like this large language model or whatever? What compels them to be able to
tell the truth on itself?
Exactly. And that's the one thing that is, I've heard Elon talk about, I've heard other people talk about it. One of the flaws of AI, and this is our underlying conversations around creativity and what are we, is creativity dying? How can we kind of, but I've heard that AI, it lies. I've actually seen it when you type in a Google search and Google's AI gives you the AI overview. The AI overview can be wrong. Can be absolutely. Yeah. There's AI papers that someone was talking about. AI created research papers that had a bunch of false notations, false sources, totally made up. Yeah, made up sources. And you think, wait a second. Then what? Why would AI be compelled to rat on itself?
Yeah, and how do you eventually all that gets thrown in with truthful things, and so how do you determine truth from false or lie or whatever?
So back to the creativity thing, then. You think we're always looking for ways to not have to create our own. I mean, okay, so think about this. Think about the difference in the life of a person today versus the person of a person 100 years ago. You had to grow your own food, or 150 years ago, or whatever. Most people were agrarian in our country. A lot of people either agrarian or cities. You had to grow your own food, cook your own food. I mean, even that, like to prepare food, cook food, you had to be constantly creating something. There, and I think if I'm not overstating it, there are people that go throughout the course of a day, and don't really create anything. Like they don't create their own food. They don't create their own. Nothing around them was a creation of them. They didn't create anything. And I think, okay, first of all, is that a problem? Because some people would say, well, Toby, you're overstating it. Why do we need to be creating? Who says we have to be creating anything? Why is that important? What do you think about that?
I think we were created to explore and create, and we're created to model certain virtues of our Creator. We're not. Some religions purport, that we will become God, or we are little gods, or those sort of things. But that's not what Christianity believes. But Christianity does suggest that we do have certain characteristics of God. We're created in God's moral and spiritual image, and God is a God that is creative. When you look around and you see that, and you see all His creative work. And so we model that. And I think, I do think we've become lazy. So much of, you look at building construction and other things, it's so utilitarian and not as beautiful as what it used to be. I mean, you look at 500, 600, 700 years ago, and you look at churches and cathedrals and just, government buildings and other things. Look at government buildings that were built in the U.S. 200 years ago versus
government buildings built in the 60s and 70s.
And they look horrible. The more recent ones are horrible. Yeah. And you look at the other ones. I mean, I recently took one of my sons up to D.C. and we did the Capitol tour again. I mean, you look up in the rotunda and you're just thinking, this is amazing that people thought of this and did it in a time without modern technology and other things.
Yeah.
And we've become very utilitarian in our thinking. But I think Christians have a rightful claim to making things beautiful.
Yeah.
Truth and beauty, that type of creativity.
Yeah.
In the way that we write, in the way that we do art, in the way that we do music, and even music is something that's becoming utilitarian.
Yeah.
It's all electronic, all digital. It's not. I mean, it's heading in that direction.
Yeah. I think there's been some of these areas, there's been these little resurgences of creativity.
Yeah.
But they're in very small pockets. Like I remember studying history. You study the Dark Ages. Why do we call them the Dark Ages?
Yeah.
There was very few kind of noble cultures that had this kind of creative bend. It was all war and destruction and and not much newness. Like you think about the story of creation, and everything is just like coming out of nothing. And you think the other thing that I think where does the creativity originate from? It's obviously from God. But there's something unique in mankind and human beings that is not anywhere else even among the angels. The angels don't have this. They don't have they don't reproduce, as far as we know. They don't create poetry and songs, and there's nothing that they do other than they are servants of God. But so you think there's something about humanity, and even animals. People say, well, the animal kingdom is very creative. Really? So the ones that look at the nests. Oh, look at how there's nests. But look at the one next to it. Oh, okay, it's the same species of bird creates the same kind of nest. Yeah. They do these incredible dances, and look at the. You can't look at the creativity in their feathers. Someone did that. That's not them.
That's right.
But even what they make, what the animal kingdom makes, is not creativity. It's some kind of wiring. It's instinct, because these species will do the same thing. Now, mankind, human beings, from day one, it's. And that's what the Dark Ages, I think, is this lack of. It was almost this lack of anything new, anything. I'm trying not to use the word creative too much. Yeah. These novel things. But then we look at the Renaissance, and what was the Renaissance? The Renaissance was science and art and sculpture and all these things that were happening, that people were that those creative juices started flowing again. Yeah. And we look at that with. We look back at the Renaissance as this time of enlightenment, and this newness was beautiful, right? Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, well, again, I think when we start off with a conversation with AI, the challenge is we can become lazy. We can become really lazy, and we want a certain thing, but we don't want to go through the process to get there because we've become lazy. And if you go and you look at some of the you mentioned sculptures or other things, that takes a lot of work, a lot of energy, a lot of vision to be able to see something like a finished product and then get it from a block of stone to a finished product that is beautiful and creative, and people, 300, 400, 500 years later marvel at it.
Yeah.
And I think we're always looking for shortcuts, shortcuts to get to a desired end result. I think everyone can appreciate creativity. Everyone can appreciate beauty. But it's very few people who want to hone the skills to get there. Yeah. And so I think that's part of the challenge, is that, with music, do you want to hone the skills for what it means to be a virtuoso? With art, do you want to hone the skills for what it means to be a great artist? Keep working at it. I think, what you see is what happens to so many of us. You begin learning something, but then we give it up. Either we become bored with it, or we, don't have the same vision that we had before for it. And again, I think the other aspect of it is, artists, if we're talking about art and creativity, used to be commissioned. Used to be a little bit of money in it. But we don't seem to value that quite as much as what we used to in terms of how something appeals to the eyes or sounds to the ears. I'm reminded of Berry College down in Rome, Georgia, and it is a small little Christian college that was started by Martha Berry, who her parents left her quite a substantial amount of money back in the early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
And she had whoever the architect was for like Henry Ford and some of those other people, he's who she had come down and design the buildings and stuff, because she wanted, when she desired to educate the mountain kids in the mountain region of Georgia, but she wanted them to know beauty. And so she wanted the buildings to be designed in such a way that the mountain kids would see beauty. And she wanted spires on all the buildings so that when the mountain kids would look up, that they would look up and recognize the creator of all these things, creator of the earth. So there was reasons for that, which we don't think about that or consider that in our design work anymore.
Yeah, and I think the question then becomes, why should I why should I create when I can push a button and there's a shortcut?
Yeah.
And I've heard that question before, and I think it's more important to think about what it's not the product, it's not the end result that's important. Like, so if I can push a button and get a good paper to come out based on some prompts that I give AI, like I want to write a paper about this, and this.
Yeah. Push
a button, it creates a product. Is that product better or worse than what I might create? Does it matter? I mean, and what's the harm? What's the harm in pushing the button versus doing the work? Yeah. And I think it's all internal. It's what it does to you, not what it does necessarily. I mean, it's what you just forfeited. You just forfeited all of the flexing and the challenge and the struggle and why is that good? And that's be the next question. Why is it good? Why is it good that I struggle through that? Why would it be good that I force myself to put pen to paper and force myself to pull novel thoughts out of my head and put sentences together in a way that compels my reader versus pushing the button?
Two illustrations come to mind for me. One personal, one's kind of I'm questioning whether I should share it or not. I'll share the personal one first.
Okay.
So I went on. I was just playing around with, I think it was ChatGPT one time.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, write me a sermon on John 3:16. It did an excellent sermon. I mean, I was actually surprised.
Was it a 3-point sermon?
It was a 3-point sermon.
Wow,
and the theology was good in it.
Theology was good.
It wasn't like,
because it probably knew to use the context of Scripture.
Yeah, it wasn't vapid. It wasn't liberal. It wasn't. I mean, it was genuinely something that somebody could have preached. I actually went back and I said, "Can you make it more exciting?" And so it wrote it out, and at certain points it said, "Can I get an amen? Praise the Lord."
You got to be kidding me.
I mean, it was to that level of degree, and I thought this could actually be preached, and that's going to be a great temptation for a lot of pastors. I have a very personal conviction against that, against using AI generated sermons.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
For preaching, and the reason being is that in the preacher and in the preaching, there is a joining of word and spirit. And that's what gets left out of an AI-generated sermon. There's no internal wrestling, a person wrestling with the Word of God, which I think is as necessary to a sermon as the delivery. And a congregation doesn't necessarily think about that, but as a pastor, I have to think about that. If I have not myself wrestled with the Word of God, I'm just basically reading a paper or bloviating whatever out to a congregation that is not God breathed.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing, and it goes along with
I'm sure there are people that would probably debate that, whether that's God breathed, right? If it's still, they would say, and I'm just going to play devil's advocate for 2 seconds, is if the Spirit of God resides in his word, right? And the word was used to bring a sermon together, then why couldn't AI bring the Spirit of God through the word of God into a sermon? And because I agree with you, by the way, but I think the challenge is that people can contort and twist things in a way that make them. I think we're always looking for a way to make things easier, right? And so, I don't know what you would do with an argument like that. If someone comes to you and they say, "Well, the Spirit of God resides in His Word," right? This is,
but I would push back on someone who says, "I'm a called preacher," and I'm not a hireling.
Mm-hmm.
So a hireling is just one who is just doing a job to get paid. And one who's been called by the Lord. You're called to deliver. What some would say a rhema word, which is kind of like that on time, definitive for this people. Thus saith the Lord to you. Can you imagine if in the Old Testament AI was available and you had the prophets going and saying, "Yeah, I got this. I got this word from AI, and that's." Again, you would never think that because you think I want to hear.
The prompts would be, "What is God saying to us right now?" And AI would say, well.
So I want to hear from God, and that only happens by wrestling with the text. I mean, I know personally, it's one of the greatest things I do. It's one of the what's the word I would put? It is one of the greatest things I do. It is also one of the things that can thrust you into despondency because you realize, like I've thought sometimes, and I don't want to take it too far off track here, but I've thought sometimes, why do these people come back every Sunday? And if it's not God breathed, why would they? So there is a responsibility. A hireling doesn't care; you're just doing it for a paycheck. But if you are genuinely in, and I will use this in a biblical sense, not in kind of maybe the ultra charismatic sense, but if you're speaking for God in a prophetic way, then you better be wrestling with God. If you're telling people this is from God, you better be wrestling with God, and you can't take the shortcut. And that is a creative process, and I think that goes back to what we were talking about before we began recording, Bezalel and Aholiab. They were people who had skill, and the Bible says, the Lord says to them, "I have put my Spirit upon them in order that they may do the creative work for the tabernacle and teach others to do so as well." That God's Spirit was upon them to be creative and to teach others how to be creative. So I think there's some responsibility to you and me here. It's not just saying poo-poo all the guys who are, using AI to shortcut the surface or shortcut the process, but it's also, we have a responsibility to say, "God, put your Spirit on me to teach some of the creative things I know." I mean, you're right. You're good at that. It's God, put your Spirit on me to be able to do that, or whatever it may be.
I think so. One of the things that when people ask me about the trip to Maui, this is one interesting kind of thing that happened. I decided to take a book along. It was a book that my oldest son, had gotten me that he really loved when he read it years ago. He got me for Christmas, and he said, "You should read the book." I've seen the movie, The Count of Monte Cristo. I've seen the movie that Jim Caviezel did back in the 90s. And it was a great movie. I loved the movie. But the book is 1,270 pages. It's a big, thick book. And I thought, I'll take it for the plane. I'm going to be in the plane a long time. I got into, and I said to Brandy, I cannot put this book down. I can't put it down. It is one of those books that when I put it down, I'm thinking about it. I'm in the story. And so what I would say is creativity is, I think at its essence, what it does is it connects us across cultures, across timelines, across all kinds of divides. It connects humanity to each other. When Michelangelo, sculpts something and we look at it, or we look at a Da Vinci painting, or we look at all the famous artists, and we feel connected to them. And I said, it's interesting to me when I was reading, and I read the whole book while we were, and I spent a lot of time, hours and hours, and Brandy was like, enjoy your time. I mean, I'm sitting in Hawaii reading a good book. That was wonderful for me. I enjoyed it thoroughly. And, but what I said to her, it's really interesting what good writing does. What it does is this is a dead man. This is a man who had written this, 100 years ago. I can't remember when it was written. It was longer than that. And this is someone who no longer lived, but he's connecting through story, his creativity. He's connecting his life or his experience or his creativity to me. We are connecting in a way that without this we wouldn't have. Go ahead.
Can you imagine if it had been same story, but it's written by AI?
Yeah, it's a different. You're not connecting to a person. And that's the thing is that's what I think AI will never do. We'll never be able to connect to humanity the way that human beings can connect to each other. And I think that's one of the things about creativity that when we create something, it's a key to somebody else's aha. It's kind of, whether you know it or not, you are going to connect with another person in a way. That's why we create. We create because in the person next to me is that God-breathed spirit that looks at a creation of another human being and says, "Wow,
yeah,
wow." The same way we look at nature and say, "Wow." When we're creating, there's someone comes along and looks at that and says, I'm so fascinated by man's creativity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really like the things that, like in construction and all kinds of things, inventions. I think, wow. I look at it and I say, wow. So it connects us to each other in a way that I would never feel that with.
I think it's also inspiring. So like AI will never inspire the way that human creativity can inspire. Again, and I'm not one who says there's no place for it at all. There's no spot for it. I mean, I get there's some things which it will be useful for. But in terms of what we're focusing on, creativity particularly, but I think there's probably other areas as well. But creativity, AI will never have the opportunity to inspire. When you look at something that's created by AI, you can't say, that's amazing. I can do that. You can't say that because you probably can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
But even if it's someone like, a great painter or a great sculptor or whatever, you at least have that sense within you, either I wish I could do that, I could maybe do that.
Yeah.
Even though you may not ever, gain to that level, but there's at least this human sense of there's a humanness there. A human did this.
And I'm connecting to and so I, as someone who appreciates good writing, I appreciate story.
Yeah.
Right. I'm connecting to someone's story. I'm connecting to their story, the person who wrote this or sculpted this or painted this. They have connected me to their story like this. And like I said, it spans time and it spans space. It spans cultures. And so I think if we're not careful and we forfeit our connections to each other. I think, it's the Matrix thing. We're just we become batteries for some. If you've ever seen the Matrix, for some technological advancement, right? That just we're no longer part of the story. We're just here, cogs in a wheel. We're just. It's interesting what when people criticize the modern education system, a lot of times they'll say that the Rockefellers created the modern education system to create gears, cogs for a machine, to basically factories to produce goods that then the elite can make money off of. And I know it sounds like a tinfoil hat, but I think there's a lot to that. Is dull down humanity, dull D-U-L-L, dull us down to the point where we're just cogs in a machine, and versus having us thinking and pondering and wrestling, wrestling with thoughts and ideas. And that's one of the things about censorship that was so offensive that fortunately a select few that did something about it during the last several years is this censorship in social media that was really a problem because like it stifles this us wrestling with ideas.
Yeah.
I can't say anything that might be offensive to you. I can't even put it out there in the ether. I can't put it out there for people to say, that's a terrible idea. Right? So it's stifling that and bringing us down to a point where we're just kind of humdrum, just spinning the machine. I think it benefits some, stifling creativity. But overall, I think it throws us into the dark ages if we're not careful.
Yeah. Yeah, and you think how many kids have grown up into that. You think of kids in the city who grow up in projects and other things.
Yeah.
How uninspiring.
It's not just projects now. I mean, and I think that is one of the downfalls of the modern education system. Even I see. I mean, even when I was coming up through school, I think is that I said I think one of the biggest things we can teach children, and I've had this conversation with people about homeschooling because I've not done the lion's share of it. It's been my wife, but I said the best thing you can do, because they're talking about programs for 3 and 4 year olds. You've heard this. Which preschool? Don't stop it. Stop it. Sorry, my personal opinion here for a bit, but I'm the one that publishes the podcast, so I can do that. Stop trying to figure out where's the best place to place your child. Sit your child at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 on your lap and read books to them. Because what it does is it connects curiosity, ideas, pictures, story with the feeling of sitting in my mother's lap or my father's lap.
No.
And that's and what that does is that encourages them to say, hey, I want more of this. Like I want to go grab another book or curiosity is the best thing you can give a child, because then from there on out, it's this love for information. And that I think then generates this. I don't want to just consume. I want to also make something of my own.
No.
Is what comes out of that.
Yeah, and that's the blessing of reading, is it inspires imagination. You can, and I think there is something spiritual to a holy and sanctified imagination that God has given to us. God has given to us that imagination to be able to see things and create things, or to see things that are not yet, and then to figure out the way in which to create them so that they do come into being. Seeing things that do not exist. Yeah, that imagination. That's at the genesis of every invention. Yeah. Is I see something that doesn't yet exist internally. I can see it. I can picture it. Yeah.
And I think what happens is people, if we're not careful, we lose that. We lose the ability to see things that don't yet exist. And then, and I think, okay, can we, I threw down some questions here. So where does it come from? I think it's pretty obvious that God placed that within humanity. Does everyone have creativity? Does everyone have some? And can we grow it? Can we cultivate it? Or can we stifle it and diminish it? What do you think? I mean,
yeah, I think it's a characteristic of God that is communicable. So God has incommunicable and communicable attributes.
Yeah.
And creativity.
You can catch it like a cold. Communicable disease is a cold.
He sneezes. God sneezes his creativity on us.
Right. Yeah. Able to be conveyed.
So, I mean, creativity is something that is one of the communicable attributes of God. He is creative, and we're created in his image. And so that is one of the things that I think is resident within all of us. So is everyone creative? Yes. I think everyone has a gift.
Yeah.
Or ability.
Yeah.
Like any gift that God gives us, whether that's teaching, preaching, whether it's a spirit, one of the more, what we might consider more spiritual gifts, I think they all have to be honed and worked at. Paul tells Timothy, fan into flame the gift of God within you. Well, it's not just me sitting back saying, God, grow this gift in me. It is me working at growing the gift for the glory of God. And, you see some of the great painters, writers, sculptors, of musicians, of history. They were doing it for the glory of God, and humanity welcomed those contributions, and the church welcomed those contributions.
Yeah.
And so I think I don't feel like we welcome those contributions as much to encourage people to develop those giftings. So, for instance, someone in the church today who may have a budding gift of painting or drawing or artistry in that way, what do? How do they express it to the glory of God in the midst of community? Someone who is good at sculpting or other things, how do they express it to the glory of God in the context of community? And I think as leaders in the church, and I'm speaking that broadly, we have to think of ways to welcome creativity, because it used to be very much welcomed into the church. And we've gotten away from that. I think there's been some very wonderful things that and needed theological things that came out of the Reformation, 500 years after the Reformation, and 500 years after the Reformation. Maybe some of the more challenging things are a loss of some of that creativity and artistry that's welcomed into the church, because we think it costs money. It costs money to build a beautiful building. It costs money to equip and empower people to do that kind of artistry. But I do think the church has to consider ways in which we can welcome that and cultivate that into our day-to-day interaction with one another, our worship times, and other things.
Yeah. What kills it? I think about, what do we do today that is diminishing it, killing it, stifling it, putting it to sleep? What should we eliminate? I was having a thought. I had a thought. Sorry, back to a thought. Earlier we said, why not just push the button? Why not just push the button and get to the end result? Why not just have it shoot out the other end a good story? And my claim was that everything in the middle is what makes me human and changes me, grows me, develops me, and helps me to experience what it means to be a human being made in the image of God. And I think if we shortcut that, we lose. It's like, why eat a meal when I could just inject it straight into my stomach? Why would I do that? Why would I eat a meal? It's because there's something in the chewing of it and the engaging your senses, and there's something in because it's it's a lot of work to chew on it sometimes and cut it up. I have to cut it up. And
what joy is it to drink one of those Ensure things that gives you the same amount of calories versus a beautiful meal that's been prepared?
What a gross idea. Yeah, I think there's a movie that I had seen long ago that was just it's just getting calories, just throwing calories, and it's this gross like pellet or something. I can't remember what it was, but the whole idea of shortcutting it to get to the end result seems like, in some respects, it seems like, well, why wouldn't I? And I think we need to ask, what are we losing when we do that? What am I losing? I think about it, and for some reason this popped into my head when Benjamin, my second oldest, decided to walk, and he started the American Discovery Trail. I started with him, and from Cape Henlopen, Delaware, to Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, we walked. I was with him that whole 210 miles, the first 210 miles. We walked, we thru hiked with backpacks. And I think we could have just driven. I mean, if we were trying to get to Harper's Ferry, why not just drive to Harper's Ferry, for goodness sakes?
Yeah.
But I would have missed everything that happened in the process. And I think that is, and maybe that's not a perfect analogy, but that's what happens when we allow something else to feed us this lie that, oh, well, the end product is all that matters. If I can get the end product, then why do it myself? Why would I create it myself? Why would I put forth the effort and energy and time and pain. It's painful to do that. And I think that what is humanity other than striving and working? And if we're gonna be all like Wall-E, you remember that movie? Do you remember Wall-E?
Yeah.
Didn't do anything.
Yeah.
These are a bunch of people that have screens in their face, lying on these floating. It was this absurd view into the future that you're like, whoa. If we're not careful, that's actually us.
Yeah.
Doing nothing novel, doing nothing that takes any energy.
Yeah.
And I think that's the danger. The danger is then what is it to be human? What is it to be human? Being human is wrestling.
A really good question to ask, because you could say the same thing of the Lord. Why did history continue after the cross? Why didn't God end things right then and redeem? Redemption had been accomplished.
Yeah.
Why not? Why are we still waiting 2,000 years later? Well, there's a process that God had determined for both the world collectively, but also people individually. Why not? Why does God not translate us to heaven once we commit our life to His Son? Because He has seen in His infinite and sovereign wisdom that there is beauty, there is glory, there is grace, and a process of moving from point A to point B. We're not the glory of what God has for us in that future. We hope for that, we look for that. But Scripture is very clear that from here to there is a process of going through tribulation and persevering through tribulation, and perseverance produces hope, and hope does not cause us to be ashamed. There is a process from point A to point B, and I think the same thing is part of what builds the character aspects that build within us when we work towards honing skills, creative skills, developing those skills. There is value for us as people and us as humans, and learning how to be diligent. I mean, you don't learn how to compose overnight. You can hit a button and do it on a screen, but for you to learn how to do it and to hear the beauty and to hear it in your head and then put it on paper so that others can then, take it and make music out of it, to see a painting in your mind and be able to actually put it on a canvas. Those things are skills that take time and energy and effort and are built over time, but they also develop your character within. A character of perseverance. You've seen, we know people, everybody knows people who have an eye for beauty.
Yeah.
And there is some, there's some people who are better at it than others. They're just kind of born with that gift. But I think it's something that can be honed within all of us when we begin to work at it and look for it and think about it.
There's you ever seen the difference between, you ever seen a machine laser engrave something or engrave a piece of wood?
Yeah.
Right? Machines do it, like a robotic type machine. And you're like, it doesn't come out the other end. And you say, wow, that's so, oh my, and you don't treat it the same. You don't treat it the same as a piece of wood that you've seen someone carve and carve and carve. And it's very different. There's something different about a machine creating something carved out of a piece of wood versus a person. And I think it's connection to each other. I can't connect to a machine, but I can totally look at a piece of wood that was handled by a man or a woman and carved and appreciated, and they saw something in it. Now I see it because they saw it in it. Yeah. And I see it and I say, wow, there's, and value. I guarantee the thing that came out of the machine, you couldn't place the same monetary value on that as you could someone carving something.
I knew a guy who was he's kind of an eccentric guy, but he was excellent with making jewelry. He actually kind of a hippie guy, and his main business line was making beads for people who like did beading and all this sort of stuff. But he could also take, like, someone had like maybe a grandma or grandpa that had passed away. They could give him a picture, and he would make these beautiful cameos that he would hand carve out of stuff. And he had the eye for very detailed kind of intricacy. And you could put something that was made by a machine and something that was made by him. Number one, it's much more beautiful what's created by him. And I'm not saying machines can't do a very similar work.
Yeah.
But he would look at what the machine did and be like, cheap junk. It could be the same material, the same whatever, and I don't think he was just being like, I'm better than any machine can be. Yeah. But he had developed over time an eye for intricate detail. The machine is only going to put out what's programmed in it.
Yeah. Even if the machine could imitate the detail.
Yeah.
There is something inherently, and I think we maybe can't even put a whole lot of words to it, but we all know it.
Yeah.
When something is created by a person, it is more beautiful, and there's something more valuable to it. I don't think that that's an overstatement, or I'm projecting onto other people what I feel. I think there's just some truth to that. It's interesting, the Winchester, the old lever action rifles, pre-64. Everyone looks for a pre-64. Pre-64, 64 and earlier, Winchester. And the reason why? They used to be handmade. They used to be hand-assembled, hand-machined, handmade.
Wow.
And they stopped. They used machines to assemble them, to start creating each piece, and the quality was very different. It was, even if it's the same, even if a 66 Winchester lever action rifle and a 63 lever action, they don't feel the same, by the way. But even if they did, there's something we place value because we know it was created by human hands. And I think the same is to be said for other things. And that's the reason why I think it's so important that we not lose it. That what we gain in creating is we connect with other people. Yeah. I think that's really at the root of it. I think not only do we imitate God, and I think that's a good thing. It's a good way to, because I think God is pleased when he looks at us and says, yes, you're being creative. That's a good thing, because we're imitating God in something that is part of his character. But I think with each other, we know that when I create something and then put it out there for others to see, I'm connecting with them in a way that a machine can't, and AI can't, ChatGPT, whatever.
I mean, you're in business. It's a selling point when something is marketed as handmade.
Handmade, yeah.
Yeah.
Why?
It's a marketing point.
Why?
And even when handmade means slight, and you'll even see
imperfections.
This
sometimes.
Yeah. This is handmade, so you'll experience slight imperfections, but you think, like for me, I'd prefer something that's handmade versus the same thing that's done by a machine.
Yeah. Yeah, my son was very into 3D printing for a while.
Yeah.
And it's neat, the stuff you can create. I know Seth is the same way, 3D printing. It's cool. You can create some really fascinating stuff. But I'll tell you, there's a Tom used to have a dental lab, and he used to make crowns. And for the longest time, and I don't know if they've been able to now create with machines the same kind of product that he used to create. He used to build up the enamel or whatever, the porcelain. He used to build up the porcelain layer by layer by layer that looked like a real tooth. And then there came out with this 3D printing or kind of it was like a laser machine that you could put in the dentist office, and you could create it out of a mold like within a day. You just put it in there, and it seemed to be this solution that everyone was going to love. The problem is it didn't look like a tooth. It wasn't didn't take the time and energy and kind of painful process of building a layer and building a layer and building a layer and building a layer. And so I don't know if they've ever actually been able to to imitate that. That world has changed so much, but I think there's something about the time and effort and energy that's put into something that can be felt, can be, I don't know, it seems to be tangible, the handmade thing. Even if you can usually tell the difference, the imperfections. I think we learn to see the differences. And so are we losing it? Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say one other example is where you see it around here some, where I grew up in Maryland. You see it a lot, is you see a lot of restoration of houses and other things. And so people although like glass in the windows, it's much less efficient, whatever else, but people want the old glass because most of it was handmade.
And it's imperfect.
It's imperfect. It's very
you see the
imperfect.
waviness in it. Yeah.
It is. And even like, artistry that might have been painted on the house, people want to try to recoup that or recover that somehow because it was all hand. Well, you can put that same stuff back that's been made by a machine, but no one wants that.
Yeah, and again, because we feel like it's in some way
it's a connection.
We connect to the artist.
Yeah.
And I think, and I don't want to overstate it or think too much of my own thoughts, but I think that's the same way that I create something, and then you look at it and appreciate it because it was created by another human being. It was put together, is the same way that I think Romans 1 talks about how we look at nature, and we are supposed to look at nature, and by looking at the creativity of nature, we are supposed to connect to the Creator and we're supposed to have this appreciation for the Creator. We look at creativity and we say, wow, by its very nature, the word creativity means that there was a creator. And so that connects us. Nature connects us to the Creator. It's the same way that I think my writing, when I write well and I convey my thoughts, The Count of Monte Cristo, in a way that the story just kind of flows and the characters are just so interesting and fascinating, that I'm connecting to the creator of this piece of work, right? I think it mimics our connection to the creator in nature. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think it makes sense. And I think as you're sharing that, what I'm thinking is the enemy of our souls is to draw us as far away from our creator as possible.
Yeah. Romans 1 talks about that.
Yeah.
When we stop looking at the creator and worship the creation.
Worship the creation. Yeah. And so you would expect to see probably what we have seen is over historical time, people will become less and less creative.
Yeah.
Because the enemy of our souls is pulling us away more and more from the creative aspects of God. Mm-hmm. And so again, that's where I would say even an urgency within the church to recover some of these things.
Yeah.
And we speak a lot about to young men and other things, and in our culture sometimes it's taboo for young men to, or I don't want to say it's taboo, but it's kind of seen like men aren't as creative. But when you look at Scripture and you look historically, you see men were actually leading in many areas of creativity.
It's because of ADHD.
And
ADHD is a superpower, as one person says. It's because it's that hyper focus on one thing, hyper focus.
Yeah.
That there's something lost when we say no. We stifle that. Sorry, I cut you off midpoint.
No,
but
I just think.
But young men, I think that we try to redirect
we have to be responsible we have a responsibility.
Yeah.
To help recover some of that, and I think that's a task we genuinely have to think about and talk about. And a task that we genuinely have to encourage the generation coming up. And thankfully, they're less attached to things and money, I think, than our generation is.
Yeah.
And so I think they're more willing to invest themselves in things that they see having a more eternal or long-term value.
Yeah.
And so
less about stuff.
Yeah. So I think we have to provide space for that to happen in a way in which is encouraged. And we really have to have that conversation. How do we encourage it? How do we welcome it? How do we develop it? How do you allow particularly the church and the people of God, if this is an attribute of God that he has communicated to us, and it's something that we ought to pay attention to.
Yeah.
So how do we help to fan into flame those gifts within a generation that may not know how to do that?
I'll leave that as a rhetorical question. We'll tackle it next beginning and next time.
Yeah.
No, it was great. Good conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.